have no doubt that when you heard that I was to take part in this opening plenary address, your first response was, well, who is she and why on earth has she been asked to speak? And the reason I know this is that that was exactly my response when Cassandra asked me. You have to be kidding, I thought. I don't have a high profile. I'm not the CEO of a major non-government organization. I'm not a noted author. I'm not a politician. And I've not achieved high office. Then I thought about it a little more deeply and came to understand that I indeed do have a voice that it is important to hear in a conference like this, which is based on social justice, social action, and how we can practice and work and advocate in such a challenging environment. So what informs what I have to say? Well, as you heard, I was born in Johannesburg, South Africa, to parents who were refugees from Nazi Germany. I grew up under the Apartheid regime and was exposed at an early age to the iniquities of that system and the inequality and oppression that existed. I was taken into townships and I saw the absolutely extraordinary disadvantage of black people in those communities. I was encouraged to ask questions. Why were black men and women not allowed to live together? Why were the security police raiding their premises in the middle of the night to enforce that law? And why were their children being raised in so-called homelands so far away? I began my professional career in 1976, which was the start of the Soweto uprising, when young people finally turned their voices against apartheid. Turbulent times indeed, and 1977 was the year when Steve Biko died in detention. Later that year, I moved to Cape Town, and I worked in the townships of Athlone and Langa and Nyanga and Guguletu, confronting the oppressive realities of day-to-day apartheid, the demolition of squatter camps from the most impoverished people, the banning of organizations that were deemed to be in opposition to the apartheid regime, and the almost total absence of services for black people. These were very dark days when the concept of a liberated South Africa hosting a successful Football World Cup were totally unimaginable. As a young worker confronted with such profound injustice, it was very, very challenging to say, well, what on earth could I do? What kind of a role would it be possible to play? Obviously, in that context, working for the government was unthinkable, and it was to the not-for-profit community sector that I turned. Of course, many organizations simply towed the official line of racial discrimination, and they worked within those suffocating confines. But there were some that were willing to stand up and make a difference, willing to challenge what was happening, and willing to create services and work for social justice in even those most unpromising of circumstances. There were some organizations that found a way to make a difference and to be sustainable. They were capable of retaining their values in the most adverse environment and despite government policy. And they did make a difference. I've also spent my entire working life in the not-for-profit community sector, 27 years in Australia. I'm therefore speaking from the coalface, from the personal and professional experience of someone who has seen and understood the consequences of injustice and structural inequality, and someone who has worked to redress it. My voice is that of a witness and of a participant who's worked with passion in the most challenging circumstances. And I'm a practitioner who's chosen to work in the not-for-profit community sector, both because of my belief in the values that we stand for and my belief in the strength of our sector to do something about inequality. I'm therefore one of the approximately 200,000 community service workers in our sector who are employed with a vision and who share a vision similar to mine, a society based on equality, fairness, and social justice, and a belief in our sector to do something about it. So what are the values of the sector? What is it that drew me to work in the sector all that time ago? In the maelstrom of apartheid society, the promise of working in the community sector for me was the opportunity to firstly hold a vision in my heart of a society that was fair, that was based on equality, that was non-racist, non-sexist. It gave me the opportunity to think laterally, to analyze the prevailing problems, and to develop innovative practice that could have an impact and in some way achieve the vision. It gave us the opportunity to transfer power. This was money, other material resources, knowledge, skills to the most disadvantaged people in the community, and work in a way that cut across social issues and didn't package people into little parcels. We were able to advocate for the most disadvantaged people, challenge injustice, and develop social capital through the voluntary participation of people, developing informal networks and contributing together to create a different society. We were able to work in democratic organizations in such an undemocratic society and develop links with national and international organizations that were willing to join us in the struggle. Hence, work in this context was both political, in that we did challenge the social structure, and it was practical, in that we were able to develop services where none existed. So what did that look like in practice? Within the organization, we were able to appoint people that were truly based on their ability and not their race or gender. We could use the resources of the organization for those who had the greatest need, rather than those stratified according to race. Now, this may sound incredibly obvious to you, but in that country at that time, this was incredibly radical. And I'll give you a very small example. There were grants for people were racially segmented and proportionally minuscule for black people. And we had what was then called inspectors, which in our terminology would be called monitoring visits from people giving the grants. And I was undergoing one of these inspections, and the inspector said to me, we had a very large staff and we had quite a fleet of cars. And in all seriousness, she turned to me and she said, and which car do the black social workers drive? And I don't barely know which car I drive. And I didn't know how to deal with this, and I just looked out of the window and pointed to one car and said, that one. Because you couldn't argue with someone like that, you simply had to. It was really an act of civil disobedience, which was a very strong feature of the work. We employed strategies, most notably community development practice, to enable people to have a voice, to organize and take action on their own behalf. This is hardly radical, but in the context of South Africa at the time, it was considered treason, and activists were subject to imprisonment. Many of the young people I worked with in the late 70s and early 80s later became leaders of the school boycott movement in the 80s. And we created links and alliances with our other organizations. And I said because of the funding issues in that country, there was a lot of international work, and we got funding from overseas.